Dear friends of Volumetrica Trading, welcome from Eduardo Buratini to this video analysis for the S&P 500 and Nasdaq for Thursday, July 24th, 2025. So, what can I say? The most obvious thing to note is that we're at all-time highs for the S&P 500. Let's start right from the S&P. And this situation was created precisely by yesterday's session. This situation has definitely continued the narrative we've been seeing for several days now, even referring back to some previous analysis videos I've posted here, where we've seen rather strong American derivatives. Okay, this scenario has definitely been helped by the possible agreement that could be reached regarding tariffs between America and Europe, reciprocal 15%. Obviously, everything still needs to be defined, but let's say the agreement has already been put on the table in some way. And clearly yesterday we had the release of the quarterly reports. So yesterday's session was definitely very heated. We can absolutely call it that. In fact, as we can see from the RTH profile of yesterday, we had what can definitely be called a trend day, a directional day, which, like all days, or well, let's say most trend directional days, tend to close right at the highs or at least very close to the highs, obviously if it's an uptrend, or at the lows if it's a downtrend. So, in my opinion, this is the first signal to consider for today's possible narrative, because generally on days that are so strongly directional, the possible break of the high on a previous trend day up or the low on a previous trend day down gives a particularly important signal in the following session. Okay. So it will be very important in today's session to actually see how the level that currently serves as the all-time high of the S&P 500, 6,400, 750, is eventually traded and what kind of volumes, what kind of order flow will develop around it. Obviously, this is something that can only be seen as it happens during the session itself. Why? Because everything depends on the type of acceptance that will be established following them. Let's say, following the trading beyond this level. And on days like these, there tends to be a continuation when we see distribution. So, on a day like today, it will be especially important to watch the intraday volume profile to see if and how it will distribute above these 6,400 to 750 levels, because if there is acceptance, if we see a distribution developing above this level, then we could see a continuation, let's say, of the structure, which typically could expand by about 50% compared to the trend day that just passed in terms of range. So if we consider yesterday's session, which expanded by about 50 points, technically, in this case, we could have a range of around 30 points above the all-time high in question, okay? These are obviously rough, yet quite essential, estimates, but they're absolutely necessary because, since we're now at new, unprecedented all-time highs and therefore in full, uncharted discovery mode, we clearly and unequivocally don't have any historical reference levels behind us to precisely define where the price might actually encounter significant resistance, okay? Break time equals 0.5s/. So, generally speaking, if there's clear and sustained acceptance above the newly created all-time highs, we could easily and quite realistically see the market trying to push itself significantly into the 6430 to 6403.5 area, potentially even beyond. Of course, this will clearly depend on what kind of order flow develops along the way. On the other hand, if acceptance doesn't occur, if we don't see distribution or if we see repeated stop runs, basically excessive dynamics above 6,400 to 750, then it's much more likely that we'll see a fairly significant rejection due to a lack of acceptance at the newly created highs. And this, of course, could lead to a day that's basically Not exactly a reversal, but a rather deep retracement compared to a trend day that, seemed almost certain, right? Absolutely consolidated up until the previous day, okay? And in this case, the most interesting levels to watch for, as, let's say, targets in the event of a rejection like this, are definitely the area between 6375 and 6370, and ultimately 6300, and the area between 6360 and 6350, likely also considering the recovery of the weekly VWAP. Uh, this level is confirmed by this low volume area that we see here on the composite profile, but it was also a particularly important acceleration area that then generated the trending move we saw yesterday. Okay, so the situation on the S&P is quite significant. Uh, it's definitely not a scenario you see every day. Let's take a look at the Nasdaq. Here it is. As for the Nasdaq, we can see that the situation is absolutely identical to what we saw develop in yesterday's session. However, there's a fundamental difference because here on the Nasdaq, we actually didn't officially create any all-time highs. We had a test of what were the all-time highs, and then we saw the market actually stop right there. It went on to make another double top, let's put it that way, on what were the previous highs. And those who watched the sorry, as I was saying, those who watched the Tuesday's analysis uh, will have noticed, will probably recognize
the
this level here. We've come back to retest the resistance that the market had left uh, right at the beginning of the week. This resistance level from which the market had been rejected right from the highs. Today we came back. No, sorry, yesterday we basically came back above it. We came right back there. And basically, this is where the day closed. So, MH, basically, we still can't say that this resistance level has been broken. We can't say it's been, like, breached. So here we definitely have a slightly different situation because we can apply the same kind of reasoning, obviously, that we used on the S&P because it's clear that this level already acts as a possible resistance. So any lack of strength from the Nasdaq in today's session to push beyond this area could obviously also be what helps the S&P to show a possible lack of acceptance or rejection and therefore open the way for a somewhat more significant retracement. If this level proves to be important in today's session, then MMH, we basically continue to see buyers being absorbed. If we see this volume dynamic being confirmed in some way, obviously it can still be confirmed even if the level gets a little bit breached. So we can easily also see maybe a small breakout attempt that could eventually be pulled back in. If we were to see something like this, a breakout attempt without acceptance, that would be an absolutely important signal. In exactly the same way, in this hypothetical scenario, as we saw for the S&P, it would lead us to retrace at least, well, to the 23,340 area as a first step, and possibly to move back through this whole zone and retest, as a second step, this slightly broader volume area that ranges, well, between 23,300, a round number, and about 23,250. So, basically, to retest the entire high volume area from which this last bullish swing started. Obviously, this is just one scenario, because if instead we were to see the price manage to break above, this area, let's say 23,423 and change. So basically, if it manages to reach 23,425 and above, it's extremely important to watch the volume profile to see if it creates acceptance and distribution. So then we have Here as well a hypothetical possibility for expansion and to have a day 2 trend of a possible continuation of RA. And so, clearly, the same reasoning we used earlier for the S&P can be applied here as well. And here too we would be going into discovery mode, so clearly we'll have to estimate the price, a bit more roughly, the possible price target in a somewhat more ballpark way. Obviously, all these analyses are intended purely for educational purposes, so absolutely, uh, they are not meant as an invitation to take a position or a solicitation to invest. Uh, Thank you for your attention, and I wish everyone a good day and good trading.